Hello and welcome to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. Now it's been said that every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, a little bit of anarchy breaks out across the country. Well, back in the day, anarchy in the UK used to be about punks, but today it's about parks, because parkrun is the largest running event on the planet, open to anyone and everyone, no matter ability or age, from pre-teens to pensioners and even prisoners. Now, Nick Pearson is the CEO and he's here to tell us all about it. Nick, welcome to the show. Actually, I'm just looking outside. I mean, it's a glorious day, nice day for a run. Tell us a bit about parkrun. I mean, I hear you were a sponsor and now you're the CEO.
Yeah, I've been CEO since 2015. My background was I worked in retail for 20 years, and sort of almost by chance we began sponsoring parkrun from day one, the initial event. And when I left retail, struck up a relationship with Paul, the founder, and took over as chief exec.
And here you are, five years later.
Yeah.
But I mean, what a phenomenon! I mean, you know, 80 events every Saturday in London, just to name one city. I mean, it's sort of it's become quite something. Frame it for us in terms of, for those that aren't park runners. What is it? What makes it special?
Well, it's interesting because you called it a running event, and so I think once upon a time it was a running event. Now we would talk about it being a physical activity event or a series of physical activity events.
So from what to what?
So physical activity as being running, walking, jogging, or even volunteering. So today, as we sit here, we would be operating in 21 countries around the world, 2,000 different events every Saturday morning and growing every single week. About 400,000 people taking part every single weekend, and rapidly reaching 7 million people signed up.
I mean, in the intro, I pulled out a quote that said it's a piece of anarchy every Saturday morning. Would you identify with it? Is that part of the magic, that it's unstructured, or do you feel very much that that's misrepresenting it as it is?
I think it is, and it isn't. So I think there's a paradox to it. What's absolutely key to parkrun is it's a local event delivered by volunteers at a community level, and so it's absolutely vital that when you get to your event on a Saturday morning, you feel that you're surrounded by your community and there's something unique and original around your particular event. That said, there is a structure and a formality to it that means equally if next week you fly off to South Africa or to Malaysia, you would get a very, very similar experience. You would get a very similar experience, but that community would be the local community.
I mean, another description of parkrun is that it's an economy of helping people be the best they can be, to change their lives and to grow as individuals. I mean, tell us about that. Sounds a wonderful day job to be delivering that.
Yeah, it's a really great place to be. I mean, it's one of those unusual and unique places where wherever you go, people are grateful and positive and thankful about what you do. I think the exciting thing is that, you know, parkrun's been on a journey 15 years in October just gone, and without a shadow of a doubt, without a question, it was a running event for runners.
And it started with 13 people.
Yeah, that first day in October 2004, it was a running event for runners. Where I think parkrun was smart, well before I got there, where I think they were smart, is understanding that the event or the events that they were putting on were actually of much greater value to the population of people that wanted to be active and felt the environment for them at that point was not appropriate, and that or was not welcoming, and there were too many barriers, and that's sort of the direction.
Yeah, I mean,
parkrun's pushed against.
It feels like, you know, you've got hold of two things. One is that kind of digital world where you can connect people much more easily, but also a much greater interest in well-being, in health, in terms of, I guess, your own personal best, whatever that is.
Yeah, and I think that comes out of Paul, the founder. So the event was started by Paul Sinton Hewitt in 2004, and Paul's a trustee now, still involved ever such a lot, and that came out of Paul's kind of innate sense of fairness and justice and equality in everything that he did. So
I was reading about him,
yeah.
and he'd lost his job as a marketeer, and his response to that was, I want to give something back, do something different.
Yeah, a little bit.
Is that...
a little bit.
The thing about founders, they have a mythology.
Yeah, maybe. So Paul had grown up in South Africa. He was a part of the running club community in South Africa, and every running club in South Africa, as he grew up, had a Saturday morning 5K time trial, and it was just a social club event, and it was an opportunity for everybody at that running club to come to one place on a Saturday morning to have a bit of a run and then get together and chat and
so a social.
Exactly right, and that sort of stuck with him for the rest of his life. He enjoyed it. It became the best part of his week as within his running club. And so when later on in his life was much more serious, and he was busy working, he was a professional, he was still running, and his life was going through the standard ups and downs. When he came to a real down, and Paul's quite open about the mental health challenges he was struggling with at the time, but when he came to a real down, he looked at that moment of his life and that event that he'd participated on in South Africa and said, if I can replicate that to bring the people around me to a single place on a Saturday where running is not just about running, but it's fun and it's social, then that will benefit me. So actually, it was as much about helping himself out of a hole as it was about giving back. It was just his way of helping himself.
Now, you joined that team early on, and you've seen it go global. I mean, was that always part of this, or have you been surprised by the success of it? Because it feels to me like it's the ultimate social enterprise. Highly social and highly enterprising, and now it's all over the world. Was there any early insight into what might happen, or has this been just serendipity writ large?
It's a little bit of everything. So there are some fascinating, I think, email exchanges really early on from Paul saying, I think that, what I really want is for parkrun to be everywhere in the world. Everybody can access a parkrun. And so despite the fact that day one, what Paul wanted was something that got him out of a hole, and actually wasn't that motivated for there to be more than one event, pushed back for a long time when people wanted more than one event. Once he'd found a template and a model to replicate it relatively low cost and in a really consistent way, he very quickly saw, almost by event 3 or 4, that this is something that can scale up with almost no boundaries. Now, the question you asked is, am I surprised? I think we're surprised every day by the enthusiasm and the positivity and the appetite for parkrun. At the same time, I think it plays to something that crosses borders and cultures and is a kind of innate part of people's DNA, which is being around other people and community and shared experiences. And so, when we get challenged a lot about it will work here or it won't work here, we recently launched in Japan, and they were really stubborn in their view that volunteering was not a part of their culture, and the volunteering aspect just wouldn't be taken on by the Japanese population, and it wasn't something they did. But actually, what you get to is communities helping each other, this kind of sense that we are...
So that's a global, consistent global,
I think so.
I guess, idea, really, and an impulse. But you're running a global organisation with quite a small team.
Yeah, really small.
And what, 45 people?
Yeah, we're about 25 UK based and around 45 globally.
Okay, so what, 65 people?
No, 45 globally.
45 globally, right.
About 25 of them based in the UK.
And you're a not-for-profit?
Yeah, charity, yeah.
A charity, so, but hugely ambitious.
Oh yeah.
And in terms of actually how you sort of remain coherent as a global organisation, tell us about what goes on behind the scenes in terms of, I guess, the opportunities and obstacles, I guess, of a day at parkrun.
Yeah, so we would largely be split into 3 main channels. And those channels would be operations, which is the vast majority of headcount all around the world, is how do we safely put on 1,000 events in the UK this weekend or 2,000 events around the world. So how do we do that, and how do we make sure all of the decision making that we are participating in is going to work across all of those 2,000
and very quickly,
events.
we're almost at the break. Your other two
would be health and well-being. So what are the initiatives that we're going to engage in that are going to make our populations healthier? And then commercial. So commercial and comms. So how do we then raise the revenue and work with our partners to make sure we can do all of that?
Okay, so those are the three big things that keep you as CEO awake at night, I'm sure, and motivated during the day. And when we come back, we're going to hear all about how parkrun is helping prisoners go on the run, but not as you might think. We'll be right back. Welcome back. My guest today is Parkrun Chief Executive Nick Pearson. Now, Nick, we spoke about prisoners on the run. Tell us more.
So in 2018, we launched our first event in the custodial estate at a prison in the UK.
You'll have to tell us which one.
Blackcomb Prison in the Lake District. And
so what did you do with them? What was there?
So their event is exactly the same as everybody else's parkrun. It is 5 kilometres at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, 9 o'clock in England or Wales, or 9:30 in Scotland and Ireland. But it's exactly the same. So it's volunteer delivered. Volunteers are either prisoners themselves or are the prison staff, the prison guards, and it's an initiative that is about trying to put physical activity and structure into the lives of the prison population. For a number of reasons. One, to try and support their behaviour, which there are a multitude of different studies which shows that it does do that. Also to significantly impact or reduce reoffending rates, and again, there's a multitude of studies that suggest it does that.
Is it popular?
It's amazed us in actual fact. So we're now in 34. We've got 34 events in custodial estates all over the world. UK, there are the most, but we've also got events in Ireland, recently started in Australia. We launched, as I said, in just late 2018. We've had over 5,000 people participate out of a UK prison population of about 90,000. So we're pushing up towards about 5%.
How does the Anarchy bit work with a prisoner run? I mean, do you have to have more structure and more, I mean, is there more preparation around?
No, I mean, the big difference is, I mean, the two big differences is they're not necessarily open to everybody, which the vast majority of our other events are, although there are a number of prisons that welcome visitors. And two, they're very often in smaller, more confined spaces. And so where a normal event in your local park might be, 2 or 3 laps or perhaps 1 lap, there'll very often be 10 or 12 laps. So the prison populations will have to make do with what they've got. But having said that, they're as popular with that community as an external event. You get exactly the same dynamic. You get the slower runners being supported by the faster runners. You get this kind of cross-pollination of groups of people. You get the social, the cultural mix.
So you get community.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, let's move on to that community, because I mean, it feels that parkrun has really turned the debate about physical sort of exercise on its head. I mean, we were talking in the break. I mean, when I was growing up, my dad was a very competitive runner, but it was very much an elite sport. People would meet, I mean, actually at the pub in those days, as obviously you did, and then they'd go for a run and they'd go back, and it was a very small group of people. But you've turned this into a mass movement where actually this is as much about first time as it is about people like Jess Ennis-Hill who's run it and other elite athletes. I mean, have you managed to turn this into more of a movement and less of an elite sport?
Well, I think we've got. I mean, we're all aware that there's an element of a health epidemic, that there is a broad lack of activity within the population for a multitude of different reasons. And I think our observation would be that continuing to tell the same story or to process the same narrative to those people that aren't doing physical activity hasn't and is never going to work. And so the inspirational stories of Jess Innes or of professional footballers or all of those kind of elite sporting inspirations work phenomenally well with the 50 or 60% of the population that are inspired by that. But there is
only go so far.
But there is another group of people that are intimidated by it, or, you know, more alarmingly, have a whole heap of emotional or environmental barriers or challenges.
Right.
To
that point, I took a double take when I was reading here that you're proud that the average parkrun speed is getting slower year on year, not faster. But I suppose that's a sort of reflection of this broader movement of people that are getting involved, is it?
It's just a tangible indication that, that we're achieving what we're setting out to do, which is broadening the accessibility to physical activity. So and you know, what you're talking about there is across, you know, 12 million finishers across a year. So it's not easy to skew those results. They're skewed over huge amounts of participation, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. And so what it demonstrates to us is that we're allowing people that historically and previously would have felt that physical activity was an intimidating place.
I read this write-up of parkrun. They said, forget profit, it's love and fun that drives innovations like parkrun. I mean, is that? I mean, you know, when you think about things like running, you think about performance, you think about endurance, but actually, this is something more soulful, isn't it? This is something more heartfelt in terms of people getting involved and doing things on their own terms.
Yeah, I think it's a good news story in a world where there aren't enough good news stories. But at the same time, I think there are lots of good news stories. There's just not people looking for the good news stories. So I think one of the things that we talk about is we offer this opportunity on a Saturday morning to do something. Only positive things, and talk about only positive things, and shine a light on positive people doing positive things.
Because it's like a carnival. It's balloons. It's just paint the picture very briefly for us of, you know, the best one you've been to in your mind in terms of what was going on, to give us a sense of the vibrancy, if you will.
Yeah, well, we've talked about it a lot. You know, what is parkrun, and one of the things that it's that physical activity intervention. It's about running, walking, jogging and volunteering, but it's also incredibly friendly, incredibly supportive, incredibly inclusive. And so and one of the things we talk about is fun being there in all of those events. So how do we make sure fun's there? The best event I ever go to is Christmas Day parkrun, and that in itself is an incredible concept, right? So, you know, physical activity on Christmas Day, 100,000 people in the UK this year.
Work off the turkey.
Yeah,
we should have had you on for the Christmas show.
At 9 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, if you imagine that as a concept maybe 10 years ago, we're going to introduce this idea of on that family day where your time is more precious than on any other day, you need to leave your presents alone, come out from your house and go to your local park and run 5k. You'd be pelted for that idea, but actually we had 100,000 people this year, and it is a joyful celebration of community and doing something positive and starting your Christmas day with other people. For some people, it's the only people they get to meet. So exactly all of that is fancy dress, it's balloons, it's families, it's generations and generations of families doing something together. It's
volunteer led. I mean, tell us about the volunteers.
Yeah, well, it's a really important part of it is that your community are delivering an event for you. So when you're there, you're comfortable that it's from being delivered by people like you. It's not imposed upon you. It's not a central diktat that says this is the way you do it. So yeah, all our events are delivered through volunteer teams, managed locally. Very, very few set of rules, as we were talking about earlier on. Lots of individuality, lots of freedom. The bits that we manage are the health and safety, the structure, the bits that fit around
because presumably 5k for a lot of people is like, I mean, I can speak personally, you know, it's a big deal, right? You know, it's not the easiest thing to do. I mean, in terms of actually how people prepare, how people get better, I mean, that's presumably part of that journey that makes it such an emotional thing to do.
I think it's one of the big challenges that are still left. There's still a huge chunk of the population that think that still is too much for them, and we know that through our own research and insight that the biggest reason that people don't do it, even when they want to, is they think they're not fit enough, or they think that that's too far.
But they could walk,
they think
right?
they'll come last. Yeah, and so, you know, we've got mechanisms in place to avoid that. So we've got somebody that's always at the rear, a tail walker, that will mean that you'll never come last, and that person will take as long as it takes to make sure that they're behind you. That said, there is still a perception, there is still a sensitivity, there is still a population that are so self-conscious, they're so worried, because historically sport has been about the people that win and dismisses anybody that doesn't.
It feels like a very UK thing to have come up with, that it's the taking part that counts rather than a celebration of half a dozen elite athletes. I mean, this feels like the national sport of actually, doesn't matter if we win, as long as we win on our own terms.
It might be. So I think there's different elements to it. So Paul grew up in South Africa during apartheid, and I think that there is an element of his sense of fairness, equality, everybody's equal, everybody is of the same value, no matter what you do, where you come from, what your colour, creed, speed, age, weight. And so I think all of those things are fed into a culture that then we've ran with as an organisation, and that's shaped it. So it's probably a bit of a fusion, yeah.
So, and you've taken that story around the world. I mean, congratulations on a brilliant sort of organisation, movement, if you will. I won't be revealing my personal best live on air. What's your best 5K? Just as
19 minutes.
Whoa, that's a good one to finish on. And that's all we have time for this week. And thanks to my guest, the super fast Nick Pearson, a leader working to get us moving and building a healthier world. It's a story bringing people together, not just to keep fit, but to create inclusive communities and make meaningful connections. And if you're looking for more from the fast movers of business, join me next time on The Capital Conversation. I'll see you then.